Important laws you need to know in a business. The Fair Labor Standards Act establishes minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, and youth employment standards. It affects employers and employees. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Many states also have minimum wage laws. For example, Georgia's minimum wage is $5.15 per hour. The employee is entitled to the higher of the two minimum wages. Well, what about overtime? Employees covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act must receive overtime pay for hours worked over 40 in a work week, at a rate no less than time and a half their regular rates of pay. The Act does not require overtime pay for work on Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, or regular days of rest, unless overtime is worked on such days. The Fair Labor Standards Act states that employers must keep certain records for each worker. The Act requires no particular form for the records, but does require that the records include certain identifying information about the employee. Employers must also keep employee time and pay records. The Fair Labor Standards Act protects the educational opportunities of minors. It prohibits their employment in jobs that affects their health or well-being. In Georgia, minors age 14 and 15 cannot work before 7 a.m. and after 7 p.m. They also cannot work during normal school hours. Now we are going to talk about federal laws that prohibits job discrimination. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It applies to employers in private and public sectors that have 15 or more employees. Employment decisions may not be made on the basis of stereotypes or assumptions related to any protected characteristic. The Equal Pay Act of 1963, which protects men and women who perform the same work in the same establishment from sex-based wage discrimination. Under the regulations of the Equal Pay Act, employees who believe they are being discriminated against can either file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission or directly sue their employer in court. There is also an Age Discrimination in Employment Act. This act protects certain workers 40 years of age and older from workplace discrimination. Those 40 and older can't be discriminated against hiring or firing, as well as other instances. This applies to companies with 20 or more workers. The next important act we are going to talk about is Title I and Title V of the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990. It prohibits employment discrimination against qualified individuals with disabilities. It helps people with disabilities access the same employment opportunities and benefits available to people without disabilities. It also requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations to qualified employees. We've talked about some important laws and regulations that affect the internal aspects of a business. Now let's talk about regulations that is in place to help consumers. Under the law, advertisements must be truthful and cannot be deceptive or unfair. They must be evidence-based. However, there are more regulations if you advertise directly to children or children-related products to their parents. It's important to comply with truth in advertising standards. When it comes to environmental marketing, either about the product or the packaging, you'll need reliable scientific evidence to support your claim. There are even stricter regulations when it comes to marketing for food, over-the-counter drugs, dietary supplements, and other health-related products. Companies must support their advertising claims with solid proof. When it comes to advertising online, remember the rules and guidelines that protect consumers. Businesses must maintain the credibility of the internet as a marketing medium. In addition, truth in advertising standards apply if you sell computers, software, apps, or other products or services. Last thing I'm going to talk about related to advertising and marketing is telemarketing. The Federal Trade Commission's telemarketing sales rule helps protect consumers from fraudulent telemarketing calls and gives them certain protections under the National Do Not Call Registry. Companies also need to be familiar with rules banning most forms of robocalling. We've already talked about some important laws and regulations. However, there are still many more that you need to know before starting your business. You should do more research on it so you won't get sued.